to be or not to be? That is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of a tragic fortune. Good afternoon. This was William Shakespeare and me, Henry Keane, on UATV channel, doing our best to explain hard things in easy terms. A national Russian idea is to die, to croak. You probably think that Russian mothers do not want their sons to die, but they're not. They're okay with it, actually.
Я мама 4 сыновей.
I am the mother of 4 sons and I have 2 daughters.
Я вам
I
отдам.
will give you all 4 sons. You do not break Russia. I will born more. Here we are, Russian mothers.
Вот такие мы русские матеря.
150,000 dead Russians. The Russian army lost 150,000 soldiers since the beginning of this unjust and criminal warfare. That includes 650 personnel lost within the past 24 hours. Russia has also lost over 6,500 armored fighting vehicles, over 5,000 vehicles and fuel tanks, almost 4,000 tanks, 2,400 artillery systems, 2,055 drones, 480 multiple launch rocket systems, 300 airplanes, 290 helicopters, 250 air defense systems and 18 marine vessels, according to their own report. A general staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine recently published report Tuesday stated that Russian military has lost 1/3 of its fighters in just last 2 months. Russians are fulfilling their heroic Russian national dream. Die for the country. Die for Russia. You never live for Russia. You never create for your country. You never do anything to exist. You just die for it. The Center of Strategic and International Studies published an analysis stating that Russia suffered more combat death in the Ukrainian war's first year than in all wars combined since World War II. The average rate of Russian soldiers killed per month is at least 25 times number killed a month in Chechnya and 35 times the number killed in Afghanistan, which highlights the stark realities of a war of attrition. The Ukrainian military has also performed remarkably well against a much larger and initially better equipped Russian military, in part due to the innovation of its forces. Well, this is maybe because we were defending our homeland. A nationwide database maintained by Mediazor and BBC's Russian service has reported over 15,000 fatalities since launching last spring. Their figures are based solely on death can be reviewed and confirmed, including social media posts in relatives, reports in local media and statements in the local authorities. The real death toll is much higher, though. The media's own reports, besides the number of soldiers missing in action or captured, is not even known. The Russian Ministry of Defense has remained relatively mum on their forces' death toll. The Moscow Times reported that their last count was like 6,000 troops in September, while Western officials have evaluated to numbers or dead or wounded eclipsing to 200,000 dead Russians. It's difficult for one military faction to calculate its own losses, let alone tally that of an adversary, but the main idea of Russian life was nothing. That is what should be written in their constitution, a peace that a dictator can amend as he likes. Death. That is what's Russian, in a number you can't even imagine. Military losses, they say, these are lives. But I can care only about Ukrainian lives. As Russians are expendable, this is a waste. The whole fucking nation is expendable because the Tsar says so. This apparently reflects the nature of warfare. Artillery duels and a massive use of poorly equipped conscripts, particularly on the Russian side. Much more tragic and criminal are civilian losses in this war. And these seem for now almost certainly to be heavily underestimated. I come home every day as the air raid alert blares in the air. Because you Russian motherfuckers want to liberate me from me.
Ukraine is under attack and defending its own territory and the right to exist. As a result, the Ukrainian population is far more willing to fight and die than the Russian population, which does not have the same motivation. Hilary Apple, a government professor at Claremont McKenna College, in an interview with Newsweek.
The Kremlin uses only abstract ideas to justify Russia's invasions of Ukraine rather than offering any of concrete reasons for how this war serves the interests of ordinary Russians, Appel says. That is why the so-called partial mobilization was avoided for a long time in Russia and why so many young Russian men fled the country, or dear Mrs. McKenna. While Russians are populations, we are the nation. We're the family. What choice do we have but to stand for our own lives? Every Russian killed here on Ukrainian soil is good, because we are fulfilling your Russian dream. Die when now how your Tsar says.
Современная Украина целиком и полностью была создана Россией.
Modern Ukraine was entirely created by Russia, or to be more precise, by Bolshevik communist Russia. This process started practically right after the 1917 revolution, and Lenin and his associates did it in a way that was extremely harsh on Russia by separating, securing what is historically Russian land. Nobody asked the millions of people living there what they sought.
And this has nothing to do actually with Putin. This is Russians' population, their mentality that gives vent to worst imperial ambitions, while you are literally buying a goddamn Western washing machine. Because you have no Russia's produced one. You just don't have it. Oh, no. Wait, what? A Russian army general is gay? Oh, Comrade Putin, what is going Russian on? That's a usual Russian story. When you are a Russian hypocrite driving a German Mercedes, where you can't be gay in Russia, you can't be black, you can't be yellow, you can't be Ukrainian, you can't be yourself. Apparently, all you can be in Russia is Russian. And that means being a slave to your delusional Tsar who tells you when and how to die. Think tank is a tank thing. The sophisticated Western tanks are expected on the battlefield in the next several months. The new Russian armor turned up earlier, and its first wide-scale deployment was decimated. A 3-week battle on a plain near the coal mining town of Vuhledar, southern Ukraine, produced what Ukrainian officials say was the biggest battle of the war so far, and a stringing setback for the Russians. In the extended battle, tanks being into fray, rumbling over dirt roads and maneuvering around the lines, with the Russians thrusting forward in columns and the Ukrainians maneuvering defensively, firing from a distance or from hiding places as Russian columns came into our sight. Russians are not idiots. They just live in the past, morbidly. I mean, the Russian army has focused on and even mythologized tank warfare for decades of the redolence of Russian victories of the Nazis in World War II. Factories in the Ural Mountains have churned out tanks by thousands. In Vuhledar, by last week, Russia had lost so many war machines that they had changed tactics and resorted only to infantry attacks, because infantry is just human. And there's a lot in Russia. Cannon fodder, remember? So what is going on in the east of our land? Well, à la guerre comme à la guerre. Geographically, casualties tended to be concentrated where the sides were especially close. But let us go back in time. Armed conflict in eastern Ukraine erupted in, early 2014 following Russia's annexation of Crimea. The previous year, the protests in Kyiv against Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych, decisions to reject a deal for greater economic integration with the European Union were met with a violent crackdown by the state security forces. The protest widened, escalating the conflict. The President Yanukovych fled the country in February 2014. 1 month later, in March 2014, Russian troops took control of the Ukrainian region of Crimea. Russian President Vladimir Putin cited the need to protect the rights of Russian citizens and Russian speakers in Crimea and southeast Ukraine. Russia then formally annexed the peninsula after Crimeans voted to join the Russian Federation in a criminal and unjust local referendum. The crisis heightened ethnic divisions, and 2 months later, pro-Russian separatists in the eastern Ukraine regions Donetsk and Lugansk held their own independence and referendums. Armed conflict in the regions quickly broke out between Russian-backed forces and the Ukrainian military. While Russia denied military involvement, but both Ukraine and NATO reported the buildup of Russian troops and military equipment near Donetsk, Russian cross-border shelling immediately following Crimea's annexation. The conflict transitions to an active stalemate, with regular shellings and skirmishes occurring along front lines separating Russians and Ukrainian-controlled eastern border regions. Beginning in February 2015, France, Germany, Russia and Ukraine attempted to kickstart negotiations to bring an end to the violence through the Minsk Accords. The agreement framework included provisions for a ceasefire, withdrawal of heavy weaponry and full Ukrainian government control throughout the conflict zone. Efforts to reach a diplomatic settlement and satisfactory resolution, however, were largely unsatisfactory. In April 2016, NATO announced the deployment of 4 battalions to Eastern Europe, rotating troops through Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania and Poland to deter possible future aggression elsewhere, Russia, on the continent, particularly in the Baltics. In September 2017, the United States also deployed 2 US Army tank brigades to Poland to further bolster NATO's presence in the region. In January 2018, the United States imposed new sanctions on 21 individuals, including a number of Russian officials and 9 companies linked to the conflict in eastern Ukraine. In March 2018, the United States Department of State approved the sale of anti-tank weapons to Ukraine, the first sale of lethal weaponry since the conflict began. The exercises came after Russia held its own annual military experience in September 2018, the largest since the fall of the Soviet Union. The fall of the Soviet Union. Lovely it sounds. That will be all explainable news for today in our weekly wrap-up on UATV channel, brought to you by our gorgeous UATV team and me, Henry Keane, for the whole free world directly from Ukraine. Stay safe and tune for more.